sharing my screen. Thank you, thank you. We'll get some time to connect without looking at the deck, but for right now, let's get started. Welcome everybody. My name is Susan Barrett, and we're really happy to have you all on the call. Thanks so much for showing your face when you can. We love seeing your smiles, and we love this time where we can engage with one another. So here's a quick look at the agenda. I'm just going to do a quick opening segment, and then we're going to turn it over to some of our amazing partners. We've got our friends from Kentucky and Vermont who are showcasing their lessons learned and some of the things they're doing that we wanted to highlight. And then we're going to end with kind of the part one of a funding conversation. We know that there is a lot of money coming into the mental health and social emotional wellness space, and we want to be really careful about this. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and it will set the stage for our part two discussion on funding, where we're going to bring some other exemplars in to talk about ways that they're coordinating and aligning and flexing out funding opportunities so that we can really have a significant investment in prevention and creating pro-social communities where everyone can thrive. So that's kind of the setting the stage for today's. So to get us started, we wanted to have an opener and wanted just to take a moment and think about, as we reflect on this year and as we kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel with all of the vaccinations that that everyone's been able to get. We wanted you to let us know what's been a silver lining for you in the past year. So we'll just, and if you want to come off mute, that's fine too. But we would love for you to just put something in chat or come off mute and let us know what's been a silver lining. Kimberly, more time with your puppy who you have side by side. Yeah, I've got mine right here with me too. I don't know what she's gonna do when the world opens up and I go away. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Hope, working from home. That's been a gift. Yeah. More time with family. Yep, taking breaks, slowing down. The walks on the trails and being outdoors has been such a gift. More time at home. Yeah, I don't miss being in an airport. I miss the face-to-face time, but I don't miss that travel time. Awesome.
Heather, I'm glad you've learned to say no to things. I think I still could use a little help with that.
I have two young daughters, and we say yes to everything, every party, every invitation, every event. Like, we're always running around, and I rarely have time just to do what I need to do. So this has taught me a lot of restraint and just like, oh, we can't do that. And I feel like I'm more equipped now, once things go back to normal, to pass on things that aren't necessary.
Good for you.
Linda, I love yours, working in yoga wear. I heard yesterday that there's like a whole new industry for wearing business-like clothing, but making them drawstring and very comfortable because people have gotten so accustomed to wearing comfortable clothes. Oh, Casey, witnessing all the amazing things that we've been able to accomplish in a very intense circumstances. Yeah, I would agree that the innovation that's taken place now and the attention to mental health by the general public has been kind of amazing, and the ability for people to kind of come together in ways they've never worked together before is also kind of amazing in that journey. So thanks for that. Awesome. So as we're just getting started, for those of you who just joined us, we'd love for you to let us know what's been the silver lining for you during all of this. So we're just wanting to give a little bit of space to engage and have a greeting and welcoming. Secretly planning an end of pandemic ceremony of burning of the jeans for daily. I know, Laurel, I'm right there with you. I actually confessed to the group yesterday that I was wearing the same sweater 4 days in a row. I can't keep track of it. And I think I have 2 pairs of jeans that I wear consistently every day. Yeah, that'd be fun. All right. Again, thank you for joining us. We're just getting started. If you want to offer your silver lining as we've gone through this past year together, just share with us in chat. And I am going to continue on with the slide deck. Okay. So I wanted just to kind of do a balcony view, and a lot of this is redundant maybe, but I wanted to kind of harness some general themes that are going on in this space right now. I have this amazing opportunity to talk to school districts all over the country, and this week has been particularly I don't know, interesting, I guess. And I'm just witnessing in real time this huge variability across not only states, but districts, specific communities and neighborhoods. We're also watching this variability actually happen in real time. Kelsey Schmitz, I don't know if Kelsey's on yet, but she was in a behavioral health committee meeting earlier this week where they were talking about the variability just within family units because of some family members have been vaccinated and others haven't. And so their experience is very mixed. Their feelings of hope is very mixed. And so again, just these are all things we know, but just kind of highlighting some of it. We also recognize the mixed experience with distance learning. You know, I think about my son who have one or two teachers who have done amazing in distance learning and other teachers who are fantastic in person are really struggling. So again, that mixed experience just within one child with all of his teachers. And then you take that and you look across systems and ability and rural and urban, and there's just such a mixed bag of experience. The other kind of common theme I'm hearing, especially from as we're working and leaning into school psychologists in the special ed realm, to be very careful to differentiate deficit due to loss of schooling time or instructional minutes or disability, and how if we're not redesigning the system, we're likely to go back into test and place, label before you can get supports without recognizing that there's a population need and taking that balcony view and thinking about how we adjust to meet the vast majority of need, both in the academic, social, emotional, and mental health space. We're hearing a lot of messages around timing and this all hands on deck, and that we're all mental health providers right now because we need to assume that everybody needs additional supports. And it's going to be really important that we're precise in articulating what that need is and make sure that we have the right dose at the right time with the right fidelity, which means, you know, again, that systems piece and focus that I'm really worried about right now because of the money getting thrown at us and this magic fairy dust approach. We're like, oh gosh, if we just hire all these people and we just, you know, bring in this curriculum, everything's going to be golden and it's going to land on the shoulders of the teachers and we're going to crumble underneath that burden. So again, making sure that that systems piece is there. The other thing that I think we need to be really clear about are wellness and resilience are things that we teach, right? That instructional, that skill, that strategy, and really being able to strategize what mental health is and the continuum mental health as. I heard on one of my calls this week around language being critical, and I think we've been talking a lot about that forever, but one thing that came up for me from the family partnerships is to be careful with the trauma term that many families are seeing our use of trauma being so much in mainstream, but they're holding the fact that they feel blamed, that they're not offering a safe environment and that they're the ones that are traumatizing their kids. So just being really careful with the trauma term and talking more about resilience and recovery in this space. As we strengthen partnerships with family, recognizing this a multi-generational issue, that life course and the intergenerational trauma that's kind of occurred. And again, those partnerships are going to be really important. But one of the things that many of our systems are doing, and again, variability across the country, is that we're actually repairing relationships with our families and communities, because no matter what decision we made, there's a significant group of family or community members who completely disagree around opening or not opening. And so it's not just, we're not just at baseline with creating partnerships with families. We have a lot of work to do in some of our communities to repair the harm that's been done this year. And by nobody's to blame. We're all trying to figure this out together, but in doing so, there's just a lot of repair to do. I'll pause there to allow for others to chime in or disagree or offer any addition. I mean, this isn't an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination, but anybody want to offer additional kind of general trends?
Susan, I appreciated what you said after the bullet around timing is everything, but it was the next clause that I was going to comment on, and I think you kind of addressed it, but this idea that we're all mental health providers, and there's a part of me that takes a little bit of issue with that terminology, and I almost want us to think that we're all mental health promoters, and we have to rely heavily on collaborating with the mental health providers, because I don't want the schools to think either that we're expecting them to be the providers always, or to take on that role when they shouldn't, which is what you were saying, with all this money. So that I'm almost wondering if we may want to rethink how we say that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Actually, that's a direct quote from somebody who said it. So I wanted to honor some of the quotations I've been pulling out this week, but you're absolutely right. Making sure we're really clearly defining the lanes in the roles that we're serving. I like to use the all hands on deck approach, or a mental health ambassador, rather than thinking I'm a provider. And I say that, but I also want us to really be thinking that mental health is a full continuum. And even as a classroom teacher, my taking the time to develop relationships, to build connection, to greet warmly, to make sure that kids know I'm there to support them, that's part of that mental health kind of continuum. But I think you're right, we've got to be really careful, because we have not trained our teachers in this space yet. And so many of us are uncomfortable, and the stigma certainly doesn't help. I think what we're learning, and Casey, I don't know if you want to offer any specific strategies, but Casey, you've taught us that when we bring our community providers and work hand in hand with our schools and build a lot of transparency with what mental health providers actually do, that's gone a long way in decreasing the stigma and making teachers feel a lot more confident and comfortable in this kind of mental health space.
Yes, it's so complicated. I really resonated with what you were saying, Susan, around how the variability just within a family. And then for me, I'm managing a very large group of people, 65 staff that have been at home, and they're preparing to re-enter into the school system physically, and so it's really trying to keep everybody grounded. I've gone into lots of groups lately and just talked about, as leaders, we have to be centered and grounded and as healthy as possible. And that's our starting point with everything, and so all the different situations and complexities that are coming with this, that the main thing is just being centered. It sounds so simple, but it actually is. And it affects everything else, so really having to take what my message to my team has been is that we have to look at each individual's unique situation. Mm-hmm. And how are they going to be able to manage if they have kids at home that are in a hybrid learning situation, yet they're needing to be physically on campus to serve the students. So the other piece too is as I'm programming for the services, it's very important for the clinicians that we can't pull the kids from instruction because that's like golden time, and so how do we remain flexible with a lot of the unknown, which is the practice.
Yeah, and I think striking that balance of, I think we need to do a better job of saying, you know, taking time to develop relationships, taking time for mental health is academic instructional time. We can't pull those apart. They're not different. You can't get one without the other. I mean, it's just, we're just not wired for that. And so I think there's going to be, I think right now everybody's talking a good game, but I think when, you know, the rubber hits the road and accountability kind of comes into play, it's going to be, no, we have to recover these instructional, we have to get everybody back on track. And somebody was saying, I think it was Phil Strain, who I was listening to this week, said, that's going to be the mental health bombshell. Like that's going to, it's not going to be okay. So how do we make sure that those messages stay present throughout the next year?
Susan, I think, Laura, I thought I saw your hand up. And I also just wanted to point out that Heather typed in chat, you don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. That is a good quote. I like that one. Laurel, were you going to jump in? And welcome to Laurel. She's coming to us from Vermont. You're going to hear more from her in a little bit.
I'll be really brief and just say we had a Vermont Youth Summit with our governor and our Commissioner of Mental Health helped facilitate yesterday, where youth from around our state just conveyed to the group listening, and especially the governor, what their experience has been like in this past year and what they were really looking for from our schools, from our adults. And one message that really resonated with me from one youth in particular was just saying, we need opportunities when we're back in school to process what we've been through. We want to talk about it. We don't want it to be ignored. We don't want to just jump into academics. That's important, but we need to process this. We need to grieve what we've lost and missed and all of that. And that was just like to hear, you know, I can be aware of that as a mental health clinician, right? But to hear the student really asking that there's some intentional planning around that, I thought was really powerful.
Thanks, Laurel.
Thank you, Laurel. That's amazing, because again, that goes to something I'm also hearing, is that all this money is kind of being dropped, but we're not listening to youth, we're not listening to families, we're not listening to teachers about what they need. And so having you all be able to have a youth summit where people can come together and really listen to what's actually needed on the ground is really important. And I so appreciate you know, even when we're talking with adults after something happens, like a crisis happens, they've been so appreciative of the emotional support that they're now getting from their technical support entities, and holding space to be able to process that. No matter what's on the agenda for that day, if something happens, let's just pause and take as much time as we need to really be in that space together and help each other through it. So I appreciate that very much. So, go ahead,
sorry,
Kelly.
Susan. Liz, Noel, you have your hand up. I want to make sure we hear everybody's voice. Thank you.
Two things I've heard loud and clear this week. One, I'll piggyback off of what the youth need. I've had more than one family express this week that the seniors this year in high school have lost much more than the seniors last year. And there doesn't seem to be much acknowledgement of that, you know, and so just this piece of how, you know, when we're in crisis mode, we identify one impact, but then a year later, like the same impact or even maybe greater is not necessarily acknowledged or recognized. So I thought that was really powerful. And then the other thing I have heard with Susan, you mentioned the drop of the money, right? So that, you know, I think with the shift in ESSA and the focus on social emotional learning and mental health in schools is we're heading in the right direction. With the drop of the money though, I heard from more than one of our intermediate school districts this week that while rightfully so, the money is earmarked for direct service to students, they're really struggling to identify the funds for the coordination and the administrative pieces that really need to occur for the work to be intentional, well coordinated, and high quality. And so that's another need that as a state, we're just going to continue to have to wrestle with for both federal and state money.
Yeah. I don't want to look back 10 years from now and say we squandered two things. We squandered an opportunity to redesign the system forever because it wasn't working for so many kids. And we squandered billions and billions of dollars and we have no outcomes to show for it. And that's been the trajectory of ed for a really long time, right? We have not been able to get out of the stagnation of academic outcomes, disproportionality, and no longer can we sit by and say that's an acceptable thing. So, you know, we've got this amazing opportunity at our feet right now. And again, we're not necessarily the people making those decisions, but how do we influence? And I think it's with the students and the family voice to rise above. To Laurel's point, when we have those summits, we've got to get the right people around to lean in and be able to listen to that. The other thing that, Liz, you really resonated with me was the senior. I have a senior in high school right now who will go back on April 26th and graduate on June 4th, who will have a prom, but it's a drive-through prom where they get out of the car and they snap a picture. And they're not mourning the academic time, they're mourning the social activities and the big events that they were so looking forward to throughout their high school years. And I don't want to, you know, there's been environmental impacts across the country too. And my son's one of those that's also been impacted by the fires, which started his freshman year in high school. So his whole high school experience has been one crisis after the other. And what we know about that from the Katrina research that's come out of that is how long-term this will be for that group of kiddos. So, but I think sometimes I'm more upset about it than he is because he's so resilient and I'm very proud of him. So I will stop there before I get completely emotional on everybody. All right.
Everyone.
Thank you so much for engaging with us. I have a couple more lessons learned that I want to share, and then we will kick it over to our exemplars. So a couple more things, and this is a huge thanks to Dan King from Medical Lake and others from our Northwest ISF demo sites. But he just took us through some really, some things I wanted to share with you all. And again, the variability of this, because Oregon, Washington, California, I think are only starting to go back face-to-face just now. So we've been out. So this is after 2 weeks of being in a hybrid experience. And I've spelled trial wrong, so I will fix that. It says trail run because apparently I was thinking about going for a hike. So, so what Dan has offered and some of our conversations in the Northwest side has been that this spring and hybrid experience is that trial run, and we should take full advantage of it because we've got smaller group of kids that we're interacting with. And so it's our opportunity as teachers to be able to practice how to fully embed social emotional behavioral strategies and skills into the classroom context. Prepare to be exhausted. I'm hearing, you know, again, our sites are just going back, and after the first week or two, they are wiped out, and their bodies have adjusted to be able to go to the bathroom, and nobody can go to the bathroom anymore, which sounds like a really funny thing because we're always kind of laughing about that, but there's no other staff to come in and give them relief from the classroom because of the safety protocols, et cetera. So we wish they wish they had been much more explicit about how school looks right now with video clips or being able to have small groups of people walk the halls before school started. They worked really hard on the traffic flow and the routine and making it positive, but kids are still really disappointed that school does not look the same and they're asking to go back to distance learning. Staff need help beyond self-care. We have got to talk about collective care, and our leaders are really, really suffering. Those are the ones that have gotten really hit hard by the community and the family. Again, nobody's fault, but they've been in the crosshairs of all of that. Some just additional things. So I know there's too many words on this page, but I did want to have, I'll just highlight this. There's been a huge amount of joy and excitement better transition than expected, but everybody's kind of worried about this honeymoon period. They're not sure if all the work that they did and putting all this emphasis on prevention and taking time to process, right, Laurel, they've actually given students and staff space. They're still really worried about what's about to hit them come fall. Teachers are eating lunch in the classroom, and while that's good, teachers aren't able to get breaks during the day. So having our district staff really push in and offer any help, no matter what that is. If it's just kind of pushing into the classroom and saying, hey, is there anything I can help you with? Even if that's cutting out something or doing just menial tasks, it means so much to teachers right now. But the good thing is that they're able to share meals and create family and have time to develop relationships, which is carrying that community into the academic setting, which has been really, really awesome to watch. Schools with strong MTSS systems have made all the difference in the world in terms of their ability to move in and out of the different teaching and learning contexts. There's no longer these informal ways for kids to ask for help. They can't just walk in the hallway and pop into counseling offices or wait for their favorite teacher in their classroom. So we have to be explicit about ways that we recognize and respond and just keep saying, hey, you all haven't even asked for help, but if there's anything we can do for you, we are here for you. And we're here, we've got warm lines if we're outside of school and you need help at night or in your community. Making sure we're building that classroom routine across every single classroom, that warm welcome and check-in, engaging instruction and an optimistic closure, and making that a ritual forever moving forward. And then again, students are expected to sit in the seat in classroom all day. We're not letting them out because of the safety protocols and distancing. So that dose of bio breaks, mind breaks, calming strategies and movement is really important, even if we're sitting inside the classroom, which we all know because we've been sitting in our Zoom rooms, and it's hard to sit all day. And then he made one additional comment, and I put this one in quotes. We need to go back to really teaching basic social skills because we're needing to wean our kids off the addiction of screen time. So I just wanted to put that out because I thought that they were awesome words of wisdom, but I know that many of you have been in school even most of the year. We were working with the teams in Georgia who have been in face-to-face sessions all year. So that, again, the variability is vast, but I just wanted to offer this as in terms of general guidelines for moving forward. One of the things we are working on, knowing that this is a really daunting task to think about redesigning the system in the midst of a disaster. And so we, in our return to school work group at the center, and Steve Goodman has been really instrumental in helping us shape this. A lot of times we've been using phases of stages of implementation or phases of implementation. And I wonder, as we're really thinking about an interconnected system framework and redesigning the system, if we use the phases of recovery to help people think about ISF or this framework as the roadmap, as the way forward, as the return to school recovery, but that we don't want to overwhelm people. So how can we script the moves in these different buckets? How do we give really isolated checklists at the state level, at the district level, at the school level? What is it that we do to ensure safety when it's immediate crisis response? What is it that we do in initial recovery to stabilize the learning environment? And recognize where we are in the phases of recovery and where we put our time and effort in that space. The cascade is also really important. I think some of the best material coming out for return to school guidance is from our center. I'm really proud of, again, Steve Goodman, Jen Freeman, and Brandy Simonson have really been instrumental in designing that full cascade of support. So I just, again, want to remind us that return to school guidance is there on our website. And without further ado, I will turn it over to Kentucky, unless anybody has any questions or additions or anything.
And I would just maybe say, as we transition here, that our thinking in putting together the conversation today was a couple of things. One, exactly what Susan is sharing just now, and how we think about not only supporting those we're working with moving forward, but also how we leverage the opportunities around the priority of mental health and social emotional wellness. And also that because of the way our center is funded out of the Department of Education, how could we better collaborate with our colleagues in behavioral health and bring their perspective in thinking about the collaborative working relationships and leveraging policy and funding out of that system, as well as, kind of thinking about things moving ahead, which will lead into that other part of the dialogue specific around funding. So I know that we've heard a little bit in the past from Kentucky, who at the state level has partnered with behavioral health, but Miriam today is going to really hone in on a few details. Then we're going to go into breakout rooms for some discussion, and then we'll hear from Laurel about the experiences in Vermont. Miriam,
Thanks,
go ahead.
Kelly. Thanks. Kelly, I see you. Can you give me a thumbs up that you're seeing the slides? Perfect. Okay. So hi, everybody. And I would invite Catherine and Debbie and Regina to chime in if you have things to offer. Kelly and I have been talking a little bit, and Katie also on and off, about kind of the perspective that I have of coming to this work purely as a behavioral health person. Many years ago, did do some early school behavioral health collaboration, and just kind of how it looks a little different from my perspective. And so we've also talked about what has been really working at the state level. And so what they asked me to kind of point out was what's happening with our state partnership, which is fairly strong and predates me being on Project Aware at this level and working for the state, actually. So especially Catherine, since you've been around longer. But there are a few structural strengths that we have in Kentucky that I think have been really helpful in promoting this behavioral health education relationship and collaboration at the state level. So the first is that we have a statewide network of community mental health centers, which ensures that every single district in our state has access to a continuum of behavioral health care, from promotion through early intervention, screening and assessment for crisis response, the whole gamut, crisis stabilization, et cetera. So every citizen in the state has access to that, which means every district has access to that. Now, there's obviously tremendous variability because they are broken up into regions and they operate as their own nonprofits, but they do have certain common denominators that they have to provide. And so that's nice for us to be able to know that every district does have access to a continuum of behavioral health services in their community, and that they can utilize that. So it gives us a little bit of a leg to stand on to promote these collaborative efforts. From a multidisciplinary standpoint, at the state level, there's a state interagency council that has, I think, been a really important mechanism for talking about well-being of children across multiple agencies. So there's an expectation that it's everybody's business to take care of the mental health and well-being of kids, and that it should be on everybody's agenda. And so at that table is education, behavioral health, juvenile justice, child welfare, Medicaid, insurance, et cetera. And it's also a place to problem solve. For example, I think some of the policy changes that can be supportive to this work have come out of identifying needs at that interagency council level over the years. And right now, they have made it a real focus to pay attention to social emotional health and well-being across all of the agencies, as well as equity and some other things. So that's a nice mechanism that supports and informs the work, and I think informs the relationship. And that does trickle down to the local level with regional interagency councils. I think the regional councils, many of them look at the universal, some of them look at the universal I shouldn't say that. I guess they do look at universal, but they also sometimes address specific needs of specific situations. So it's, again, some variability there, but there at least there's that model and parallel process. We also have something in Kentucky that is available in every school that can serve as a really great boundary spanner between different agencies and collaborative partners. And that's our FRISC system, our Family Resource and Youth Service Centers. And that's, you see on the screen what their mission is. And so it fits really nicely into ISF and this idea of a collaborative, comprehensive approach to student mental health. So those are some things that have been able to support the work at the state level and enabled us, I think, to take some things for granted. As part of that, we also, I would say, the Department for Behavioral Health has a very strong network of children's services directors. And so we are now actively trying to parlay that, those relationships between the Department for Behavioral Health and the regional children's services directors into something that can really focus on school response and school-based mental health. And I think that it's happening in the other direction too, because even after talking about this for a number of years and kind of raising the issues, there have been recently some aha moments. Some of you have probably seen the slide that's going around that talks about the fourth wave of the pandemic being the mental health surge. And so some folks had seen that. And also some children's services directors came and reported that they were being asked to provide supports to staff. So to the comment earlier in the chat box about staff seem to be struggling more in some places than the kids so far, at least that's been the observation in some places. And so that was a little bit of an aha moment for the behavioral health providers at the local level who came to the state and said, we're seeing this. And the fact that there was this existing state relationship was, I think, able to really promote back to them, absolutely go for it in that way. But also the fact that there was this network of children's services directors so that they talked about it among themselves and could immediately share ideas, knowledge, et cetera, all the reasons that that's good. Catherine and anybody else, you want to add anything to those strengths?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks.
I would also say that, this is our second AWARE grant, so there's some history, and then there's a lot of history of strong PBIS support. So that all plays into this also. But I think, at any rate, okay, so what are we doing now? Really trying to, so one of the things that we realized was that despite this very good state level relationship, we still have some gaps and some areas that we have to pay attention to, and we definitely do at the local level. So we realized that some of our assumptions around shared language might be faulty even at the state level, and that we needed to kind of dial back and make sure we were all talking about the same things all the time, clarify, look at frameworks, et cetera. So we're really trying to take a conscious effort to do that among ourselves, and then to push that down to all the folks working in state government to support districts and schools, and then get it down to the district and school level. Also realized that we needed to give different folks with different roles in the school some opportunities to really understand and appreciate what a comprehensive school mental health approach or an ISF approach meant for them, what their role would be in it, and to talk about it among themselves so that they could work through some of the anxieties, challenges, anticipated kinks. So we're in the process of designing a core set of slides that can be tweaked for example, counselors or school psychs or our Family Resource Youth Service Center folks, and also our partner behavioral health folks, that uses the same language, the same core framework, but really make sure that people are getting it before we ask them to engage in their multidisciplinary work, because we realized we had been pushing this multidisciplinary work and that they weren't always speaking the same language, and it was and they thought they were, so that we really had to dial it back in that way. The other thing that we've done at the state level, which was the brilliance of Catherine when she wrote this Second Aware grant, is to entice behavioral health to engage in school-based services by offering them training for evidence-based practices for school-based services. And in this case, we chose Target, which is Trauma Affect Regulation Guide for Education and Treatment. Anyway, it's a terrible name, but the acronym is fine. So it's a trauma-focused clinical intervention. And what we liked about using Target is it can be used in schools for individual and group work, but also can be used clinic-based, home-based, et cetera, has individual, group, and family modalities. And so we were able to entice some participation by offering a stipend to clinicians who are going to participate, running it as a learning collaborative so that they'll get ongoing implementation support. And the requirement is that the clinicians who participate in this training and learning collaborative must be committed to delivering school-based services. And that has ramped up some interest, and especially in this particular moment where there is some heightened awareness of, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? It also points to the issue that, typically the school-based therapists, unfortunately, are the new therapists, and that maybe making sure that you're sending people with real expertise if they're going to be dealing with some really complicated issues is wise, or at least making sure that there's good training is wise. So that's one of the ways that we have looked to be creative about the funding challenges. I think you're probably familiar that you're familiar with this, and we're always facing this issue of how do you engage behavioral health at tier 1 if it's not a billable entity. We really would like to promote in schools that they use existing behavioral health providers and not hire their own, because we're worried about sustainability from that. But we also know that at this particular moment, with the money drop, that could be something that happens. The idea of capitalizing on this particular moment for not only schools to recognize the need to address behavioral health, but for behavioral health, as I said, to have that aha moment that schools is where they need to be to address this fourth wave or anticipated surge. And I can't read what the last thing on the slide says because my banner is in front of it. So can somebody, Kelly, read that for me? What does it say at the bottom? Can't remember what you
using
put.
the full continuum of intervention supports.
Oh, yeah. So self-explanatory, I think.
And Miriam, as you transition, I'm going to let you know that there's a request in chat that when you all are ready, people would love to see the slides you've put together that you're using in your training of behavioral health partners.
Okay. Yeah, that's been an ongoing thing. So we've had some real lessons learned. So perfect transition. So in doing that, we've realized just how much we need to adjust how we bridge different perspectives from educators and even school-based mental health oriented and social service oriented providers to behavioral health providers. Very different ways of looking at things. Okay, so our lessons learned are, I think, probably some that you'll relate to. Even though we have these really great state level relationships, this doesn't always transfer down to the district level, and that the level of support and coaching and technical assistance and cheerleading and listening that is required for that is really pretty tremendous sometimes. And so we need to have capacity for that. I think that, one of the things that we also have learned, and this is something that I felt, it took me a long time to get my head around some of the aspects of ISF in terms of the language coming from a behavioral health side. It really, comes out of a school side. And so for those of us who didn't grow up speaking that language, it is a bigger leap sometimes. And so that we may have to work harder to bridge those gaps. I've already said that we made some assumptions about even people within schools understanding all of the pieces fully, and that's why we're doing the role-based training. We know structural barriers are real, but we also know that we have to figure out solutions that give people a sense of an immediate benefit or solving of the problem, because patience is not in strong supply at this point. I think the other piece that we really have found as we push this down is that certainly there have been times where there are perceptual barriers between departments at the state level, but I think we've mostly been able to bridge them. And one of the other strengths that I didn't mention is we have a couple of people who have been stable in their roles for a very long time. And so there are some very strong relationships across departments, but that, overcoming old myths and old hurts and adversities between behavioral health and districts at the local level can sometimes be a real challenge. So no matter how well we're doing at the state level, translating that is difficult. I already mentioned the fact that we have to change the thinking that the school-based providers being offered by behavioral health are the youngest, least experienced providers, and that we really need to be stressing the importance of strong training, lots of support, good clinical experience and judgment, and make sure that they are people who can pivot quickly to respond to what may come their way in the course of a day of being at a school. I think the other piece that we're wrestling with and we're thinking about is that just asking behavioral health professionals to join a team doesn't always still engender real partnership or real collaboration. So it's a step up from co-located services, but it may not yet be at truly ISF. And so, what are the mechanisms of change that we need to be supporting that can really create more of a sense of collaboration, transactional communication, those referral pathways and feedback loops, et cetera. And all of this we have in theory. We all have not a million, but several frameworks that can do that. But I think that one of the things we're thinking about at the state level is what's our responsibility to try and support those change mechanisms to make sure that this is really happening, and how can we do that better? And I think the last two are pretty self-explanatory, that, we can't, the building the infrastructure it turns out it is person dependent. The reason we want to build the infrastructure is so that it will sustain changes in personnel, but in order to get it built is you really do have to have those relationships. And so when we have changing administrations every 4 years, that can sometimes be a challenge. I think the other thing that I would say from the behavioral health side is that several of my colleagues have sometimes said, this seems, we know how to do this. It's not really that difficult. How come it's taking us so long? And I think back to, again, appreciating that our behavioral health lens makes certain assumptions that we have to recognize are not always made by everybody else. So I don't know if there's anything new for anybody in that, but that's kind of where we're at. I think the trick for us, and it happened in the last 2 days for me, is really stepping back and being able to take the time to think through how we're going to do what we know needs to be done in a way that's going to be effective. Given we have lots of tools, we just still have to figure out how to use them in the best way. And to that end, I just wanted to make one comment, Susan, on your recovery model. I think one of the challenges right now is that we don't have the phases of recovery as clearly as we did even after, for example, Katrina, although Katrina has some of the same characteristics because of the length of time of this particular adversity for children, for kids and families. And so it's not like there was a single episode and then we had that period of time where we could stabilize universally and see who rose to the surface, who needed tier 2 and tier 3. We have kids coming in needing all of those things as a result of this particular adversity, in addition to all of the kids who already had all of those needs. And some of them are the same because the ones who had more challenges have had a harder time. But I think that that sets up a slightly different need for the recovery structure too, and it complicates it in a way. Anyway, just wanted to
That's a
say
good
that.
point. Yeah, very good point.
Thank you, Miriam. Would you mind going to the next slide, please? Thank you. Wow, so that was a lot, and I appreciate Miriam trying to go quickly through, honestly, years and years and years of work. And I'm sure some of those same points resonated with many of you in the states in which you live. So what we're going to do is go into breakout rooms for 5 minutes, so not a lot of time. And these discussion questions or the prompts for you all come from our funding dialogue guide in the first volume of the monograph. They can be applied to funding, but also how are you partnering with behavioral health? What are your current conditions? If the conditions stay the same, what's the most likely future? And what's your desired future, which might be different, right? So because we're going to be getting to more discussion about funding, we thought it would be helpful to remind folks about that dialogue guide. I think, even though it's, dare I say, almost a decade old, I think the logic still holds. And so I'm going to open the breakout rooms and set the timer for 5 minutes. And I would ask, I've got some folks who are going to help facilitate the conversation, so they'll remind you of these questions, and then we'll come back and just do some super quick reporting out before we turn to Laurel and hear about Vermont. All right, let me find the right button, and there you go. Welcome back, everyone. Susan, I'm going to ask you to please just have a couple of folks report out. Laurel just sent an email that they're having a thunderstorm and her power just went out. So we might have to move on to the next section until, or if she's able to rejoin us to share what she was going to share with us. So I'm going to just mute myself for a minute and see if I can help her.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. She froze during our breakout room, so I think we saw that in real time. But at any rate, let's get a couple people to share out. I don't think we formally asked you to have a reporter, but if you could quickly share out any kind of big ideas or conversations that for the group.
Susan, I can go for our.
Thanks, Amy.
So one of the things that Miriam pointed out as a fear would be that everyone has this impulse to help, and if we don't do it in a systematic way, our future isn't going to be better, right? It's not going to be desirable. And then we talked for just a second about what the role of the behavioral health is going to be, and that we have to move from what's billable to what kids need, and that mindset shift. And then the SEL world, maybe the preferred future will look like the SEL world will move beyond our focus on a curriculum. Did I miss anything, Casey, Steve, Miriam?
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. Thank you. I worry about that shift too. I worry about this notion of getting in the pattern of hiring and buying without really recognizing that the system needs to shift, that we can't hire our way out of this. We can't buy a curriculum and expect it. It's really the systems level and the coordination of care that we have to pay really critical attention to. Others. Thanks, Amy, for reporting out for your group. Oh, good, Laurel's back. Yay. Yay,
I think in
Laurel.
our group, I feel like that was a similar theme. I think, hope that might, I saw you nodding there too, but kind of resonating with that theme around, we often hear this, like there's not enough support, there's not enough mental health support, especially at a tier 3 for individualized interventions. And Hope was really building on that point of how to help build that understanding of a multi-tiered system of support. And if there's not enough support for tier 3, then how are we building our preventative tier 1 and our tier 2 systems for responding? And I think that builds into the other common theme with Liz from Michigan and Sarah in Delaware, just that building that common understanding and that common language, and how important that is to have the right stakeholders there as we're defining that language. So really coming back to resonating with what Miriam was saying about how they've engaged those voices and are continuing to define that and educate those pieces. And, you know, Miriam makes it, as Kelly pointed out, sound great and all the work they've done, and that Kelly pointed out that it's still taken time, right? And so that the amount of time that takes, but to do it systematically so that our future does look different.
Mm-hmm. And how do you redesign the system at the same time? There's so much need right now that has to be done. But I think it's actually us pushing into the schools and understanding what the schools need, and then figuring out how we redesign to accelerate the momentum at the school level. So I think we've got to pick really carefully the schools to work with so that we can inform how we redesign. Yeah, that was awesome, Katie. Thank you. Others? Anybody else have? Debbie, I don't know if you want to mention the teaming conversation we had.
Sure. So a couple of us resonated with the teaming comment about how if you add someone to the tier 1 team, it doesn't make them really part of the team. And I was sharing in our state with 2 different aware districts, one of our mental health clinicians that's at the tier 1 team doesn't really feel part of it. You know, they don't engage with her. But in another district, we have a very vivacious person who is completely engaged and seen as a full member of the team. And so I appreciated, Miriam, your point about really attending to that. And Susan actually was also saying, like, but it doesn't mean we break up that tier 1 team structure, but, you know, where's the kind of upper level leadership role in ensuring that people are on equal playing field, so to speak. So they're not just, you know, it's almost like they're sitting there as the token mental health person. They didn't use that word, but that's like when they talk about it, that's how it felt, but not really a true member of the team and the community.
Yeah, and how explicit we need to be about the onboarding and honoring that they have a system, we have a system, and we need to strike the balance of sharing the space. Yeah, I worry that we're popping up mental health teams that are separate from the return to school plans and what's going on in terms of the systems pieces at the superintendent level. And we've got to be able to have one team that coordinates all of that, so we're not splintering and siloing, continue to maintain that siloing piece. Anything else? I know, Kelly, I think we've got Laurel back, so should we shift? Do you want me to share my screen again for the Vermont slides?
Laurel, do you want to share your own slides? We want to be supportive, knowing that you're on limited.
I can try to.
Okay, great.
We just had a thunderstorm roll through and our power went out. So I'm on my mobile hotspot and hoping it will stay. It's a little dark here, so apologies. All right, let's try this. And I need to move stuff so I can make this bigger. Sorry.
All good.
Okay, can y'all see that?
Yes.
All right. Hi, I'm Laurel Onland. I'm the director of the Child, Adolescent, and Family Unit at the Vermont Department of Mental Health. We are in our first round of Project Aware work and have connected with Midwest PBIS on other initiatives also. And honestly, Miriam, I felt like I could just say ditto and cover my piece because there's just such similarities with everything you talked about. Slight differences, of course, but the themes are so similar. I wasn't quite sure, you know, obviously I haven't been a part of your conversations before to know what you've covered. So I think I'm going to skip through a bunch of stuff, but, you know, this is our Department of Mental Health kind of vision and how we really do try to cover the whole continuum of need for Vermonters, for Vermont children, youth, and families. And I'm realizing I can't use my keyboard, so I have to go up here. We have, when Kelly asked me to come talk, I was a little bit like, are you sure? Because we're kind of weird in Vermont. It's a little different. So she assured me that sure, it'd be good to talk about this unique structure that we have. So we've had this Medicaid mechanism that is under the authority of the Department of Mental Health that's been in place since 1993 under our prior governor then. And it's called Success Beyond Six. And it was our attempt to really build upon a previous grant initiative we had for Success by Six, meaning we want to ensure the early childhood system was strong in Vermont. And then we realized there was kind of this drop off of we had some coordination for school age, but we wanted to strengthen it. And so this Success Beyond Six concept was authorized in the early mid-90s to really kind of intentionally support our broader, we call it Act 264, but our coordinated services system across the Agency of Human Services and the Agency of Education, including child welfare, juvenile justice, mental health, developmental disability services, et cetera, and family voice within all that. And so this mechanism was a way to help reduce the cost burden on schools for addressing the mental health needs of students by leveraging the Agency of Human Services Medicaid for those Medicaid enrolled students. It's a way of creating a more formal partnership between our school districts and our community mental health agencies. So similar to what you heard in Kentucky, we also have a community mental health center within each region of our state that the districts and residents access. And that's where they're, private nonprofits, but with a large portion of their budget funded under public Medicaid funding, with authorization by the department, quality overview, all kinds of expectations for who they are and what they provide and how they're structured and the oversight of that. So here I just shared kind of what our initial goals were back in '93. We recognize that if we could really address the needs of those students who are at risk or had intensive needs, that would benefit all students in the classroom. And we wanted to strengthen the partnership between those community entities, the districts, and the Human Services provider system, including our public mental health agencies. And have an intentional way to really make sure that we are leveraging the resources that are going to our different parts of the system within communities in as much of a coordinated way as we could, so that we're not duplicating, but we're really maximizing for kids and families. And I keep going to my keyboard. So what is Success Beyond Six? Like I said, it's the name for our Vermont Medicaid mechanism. The way it functions, I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail, but our local school or district contracts with our local community mental health agency and decides what to purchase for mental health services. And that can be anything from school-based clinicians to, we have more intensive programming called behavioral intervention services, where we can do some applied behavioral analysis work and have some behavioral interventionists do some one-on-one support for students who really need that degree of intensive supports. And then we have a component where we can blend the mental health services within therapeutic schools and leverage this Medicaid for that. So the district decides what they want to purchase. So that's really like a local decision about what resources do they currently have and how could this community mental health partnership kind of plug in and support and enhance that. And then what of that can be covered through our Medicaid system and what might the school be purchasing directly outside of Medicaid. And then it's those that are provided to Medicaid enrolled students and our Medicaid covered services. It flows, like I said, through our designated agencies and our DMH authority for that. And we have these partnerships in nearly every school district. We have a couple of districts that cross into New Hampshire where it's just a little different structure. I'm just trying to think of what would be most helpful for this. As over the years, when it was first structured, it was a fee-for-service mechanism. Again, I'm coming to you as a mental health provider and administrator, so I don't know if it's helpful to kind of get into this aspect of it. But we in Vermont have entered into a different type of agreement with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And it's this 1115 Global Commitment Demonstration Waiver that gives us more flexibility in how we can use our Medicaid with parameters about how much growth we can have in that Medicaid over the years. And so in that 1115 waiver, we can do some alternative payment approaches for not just mental health, but other Medicaid covered services. And so we've done that within our school-based mental health component, which really has helped, especially with the school-based clinicians, to allow those folks to partner more in that multi-tiered system of support, or the PBIS tier levels, so that we have this per member per month case rate that covers the position of a school-based clinician. We have some minimum service thresholds that they have to provide to draw down the Medicaid. But for schools that have attained a certain level of PBIS, we actually have reduced the expected caseload, meaning how many students does that clinician have to serve to be able to draw down that caseload every month, so that they would have more time within their weekdays to participate in the planning, the meetings around what are we doing for the full school, providing their mental health lens and consultation around the school environment and the tier 2 approaches. And that really, I feel like, shifted kind of how some of this is happening in Vermont. And I think we're proud of it. It still gets at some of the issues that were just talked about around some clinicians just get it. They understand it. They have that kind of broader systems lens. They're comfortable with providing consultation for educators. They speak both languages, if you will, right? Like this is a cultural kind of bringing together of folks. And then there are others who, whether because they're new and kind of early in their career, or just it's not so much their skill set, there's a need to provide more input for them, more training or some workforce development about what does it really mean? This isn't the traditional outpatient clinical role. This is a really different role. This is about how do you integrate within the school and not just serve the students, but you're really working with the administrators and the educators and how they're thinking about things in classroom, structure and all of that. So we've done some trainings to that end. I think we could do more, especially because turnover is high, but that's one aspect that I definitely wanted to share. Just see if there's anything else in here. We also, if there really are, there's the ideal and it works well in places, and then we have gaps in other regions. So there are some regions of our state that are very rural. There's a more of a challenge in finding the workforce to fill some of these roles. And so that's where the partnership between the district and our community mental health agencies is really important around talking through those challenges, because when there's a contract in place for school-based mental health services, but there's not someone actually in that position, that leads to challenges. And then the school district feels like, well, we still have to provide this to our students. How are we going to do that? And then I don't know if you all experience this, but we also have situations where our public mental health agency, our community mental health agencies are seen as kind of the training grounds and provide a lot of supervision and support of staff. And then sometimes they get hired directly into schools who decide, well, we're not going to do this contract anymore. We just want to hire that person directly. And so that contributes to that turnover and can become a challenging cycle when there's a history of kind of relational difficulties. And then in other situations, we hope that there can be some of that direct dialogue about, it's going to benefit all of us if we're not kind of taking from one another, but recognizing the strength in building up a strong workforce who has some good foundation of training. That's the ideal, of course.
Laurel, there's a question in chat. Could you speak to how the non-billable hours are funded in the PMPM?
Yeah, so that's where, so there's a target caseload that they have to reach, and then there's the minimum service threshold. So they have to provide, a certain number of hours to be able to bill for that student, and they have to do that for a certain number of students. And if they do that within a month, the way the rate is set, that should cover the cost of that position. And those thresholds and caseload targets were set such that it wasn't going to maximize, 7 clients a day that they'd have to see every day, but it allowed them to have some additional time to be able to participate in those other broader school-based areas of focus. Does that make sense? Hopefully.
Yes, thank you, Laurel.
Okay, thanks. I can't see the chat as
That's
easily,
okay.
sorry. So I think someone else spoke to this a little bit, that integrated care approach is something that as a department of mental health, we really are focused on. We want to provide mental health services where kids and families can access them. So that means being where they are. It means in early care settings, in primary care, and of course in schools. And so we've tried to approach this from a, what does integration really look like? And it is about those kind of two systems and understanding what are the values, the language of the one system and the other, and how do we kind of bring those together? That's, again, a work in progress. And I feel like some of our efforts in partnering with the PBIS folks has been really helpful toward that end. We've seen a real increase in schools recognizing the need to have trauma-informed, trauma-responsive schools, and to recognize how do we get more informed around the impacts of trauma, but also the resiliency, and where we want to focus around building resiliency among the adults in the building and with the kids as well, and with their families, because it's obviously they all connect. And so that's another aspect where these partnerships, some of the local contracts between the school and the mental health agency include some specific training for the education staff around trauma, resilience, and other topics. I think, where we have challenges, again, like I could say ditto to some of this, I think there's great intention across our Agency of Education and our Department of Mental Health. I'm in a different agency than our education entity is at the state level, but we do have this kind of broad commitment that's been in place since the mid-'80s that we function as a system of care together. And so we kind of always come back to that, like this is a joint approach that we're trying to have. And so needing to work through that, but there is, that turnover is hard. You kind of lose track of who's working in this part in my partnership. I think Project Aware has honestly really strengthened those relationships at the state level. We're having conversations about our different ways of work and what agreements can we have about how we can partner together in different areas. But I'll be honest, I don't fully understand the whole structure within the Agency of Education, who I talk to with what, but I rely on them. If I say, this is the area that we want to be talking about, they'll say, yep, that's me, but it's also, these other people from other parts, other divisions. So demonstrating that, I think at the state level has been important for our children's division directors at the local level, as well as the districts, to see the importance of communication is at all levels. And so we definitely are recognizing, if we're expecting them to come together, we have similar to Kentucky, a local interagency process and a state interagency process. We want that to be a parallel process as much as it can be from state and local, and then figuring out how to communicate between those, I think, is also the challenge. COVID, I think, revealed, poked holes, it showed us the holes in some of that, but it also led us to strengthening and connecting more. Like I now have a regular time with the Deputy Secretary of AOE where we just connect and talk through, what are you focused on? Here's what we're focused on, problem solving some things. And then we have the same thing with our Commissioner of Mental Health and Secretary of Education, and then the two deputy and myself. And that's tremendously valuable, especially when things are changing so quickly, but also to help us continue to say, what's our long view? What are we working towards? How do we get there? So we've had conversations about what other payment reform initiatives do we want to look at in school mental health? What are some other issues around making sure that we have equitable access to these partnerships locally? So those have been really valuable. I do have in here also, you know, this, at the same time, mental health, we have our kind of initiatives, and to know when and who to loop in that this is what we're doing. How does this connect with stuff you're already doing in education and vice versa, I think is an important component of this. And then I wanted to acknowledge that even within the Success Beyond 6 Medicaid for school mental health, there are still other ways that school mental health happens in our state. You know, there's, as I mentioned, sometimes districts will directly hire someone, and there are pros and cons to that. You know, they can, you know, kind of make the decisions about what that person can focus on. There's not the stratification, that's not the right term, but the level of kind of clinical supervision and additional support that a mental health agency might bring to that person. And so we've, you know, just been talking through the pros and cons of these different structures. You know, is it internal? Is it just coordinated? Is it co-located where they have an office opened up in their school where a private clinician might come in once a week? That can be beneficial for some kids. It certainly doesn't get out the piece that you all have been talking about here around how do we think about those broader tier 1, tier 2 supports. And then there's that integrated approach, which we think we've tried to have the Success Beyond 6 mechanism really support that aspect of it. Oops. I think some of these are pretty obvious for all of you. So people often ask, so what was the intent behind Vermont applying for our Project Aware, given that we have had this history of school mental health under Success Beyond 6? And it became a component of, it became clear that the strength of our Vermont multi-tier system of supports and PBIS was really focused on, you know, curriculum around social emotional learning. But we wanted to make sure that it was clear how that then linked with our school-based mental health, more direct intervention, treatment, you know, the partnerships that we have between the schools and our districts, and to just understand it and take it to the next level. And so that's what we're working on right now. We have folks from our Agency of Education and our university who help with our PBIS implementation. And we're really talking through with the Interconnected Systems Framework, what value add does the Interconnected Systems Framework bring to our MTSS approach? And how do we make sure that those are really well understood by the people who are providing the school-based mental health and the administrators within the school? Some of that is about, you know, the mapping that happens through this. So understanding, like I said before, knowing what a school district already has and how do you plug in the community mental health components to that so that it's not duplicative, but really is value add. And so those tools have been super helpful. And then I think, again, everything that was talked about in the beginning around there's an influx of funding coming, and there's perhaps, you know, a worry about, are we just going to start kind of purchasing new programs versus really thinking about how does this enhance what we already have or strengthen it or fill a gap that we haven't had but really are wanting to. And then, of course, how do we sustain it, I think, is everyone's question. I was just, again, not knowing what you all have covered, I was just going to acknowledge, you know, the pandemic one silver lining, which I could have said back then earlier and today, is there's a tremendous increased public recognition of mental health and the value of focusing on mental health and wellness and supports and the value of interpersonal relationships. I hope that continues because it's certainly, it's a part of our system that's essential, and yet our workforce is kind of dwindling and the funds have been not always, you know, at the level that we need it to be, I guess I would say. we've been seeing the need increase over the years, and the resourcing of it hasn't always kept up. So I'm hoping that that's one thing that can come out of this. In Vermont, our Success Beyond 6 funding structure was a strength and a challenge. I won't go into those details, but we had been able to continue providing school mental health services even when kids were remote or in hybrid structures. Many of our elementary schools actually went back to at least 4 days a week in October. Unfortunately, my kids have been, which is why I got distracted, because my husband's wondering who's picking up the kids today. But most of our middle schools only just recently went back within the last month or so. And then our high schoolers are still at least in hybrid, if not fully remote. So it is a mix all around our state. But our districts really recognize the importance of attending to the mental health still. And so those partnerships with our mental health agencies were able to sustain during this, so that the school mental health staff were not necessarily providing it in schools, but they're still attending to those kids' needs to help them access their education. They're going out to the homes and in safety precautions, but they were deemed still an essential service to be able to check in, especially on our higher risk students and families. And that's been really key. They also, I think, brought that lens of, it's so easy for those of us in helping professions, teacher, educators included especially, to just go and make sure you're helping the kids. And I think the school mental health clinicians were really attentive to, yes, and you need to take care of yourselves first. Remember the airplane analogy of, use the oxygen on yourself before you help those who are dependent upon you. So there was some efforts around doing some mindfulness activities with the adults, the educators, and other things. Not just saying, attend to self-care, because I think we're all tired of that, right? But like, how do we actually integrate this within your day? And again, that was in pockets. It's not as if we had a great system statewide, but I do hope that that's something that we can continue to think about of, how do we integrate it? How do we support it? How do we offer some of that peer sharing, debriefing, not therapy, certainly helping someone if they need to access more mental health supports for themselves. But I think it's an important piece. And I think the school-based clinician or the school mental health folks can help schools think about that and what it could look like. I guess just last, our Agency of Education has been putting out this recovery plan, and I was really thrilled that they kind of pulled in mental health as they were drafting it and thinking about it, and that they put the social emotional functioning, mental health and well-being as the number one. Obviously these are, I don't think they're in rank order, but to me they are. And then they are setting an expectation that every district create a district level recovery team. And as I was hearing and thinking about that, it was a beautiful alignment with what our Project Aware districts are doing, or on district level community teams, right? And so, we've been trying to message, this isn't it. This is not a new team. If you already have a DCLT, this is who could become your recovery team. If you don't already have one, the concept here, this is where I'm not sure what's Vermont and what's national, but there are the educational support teams within schools. So the thought was that these are district level educational support teams and needed to kind of reflect something similar, where you do have mental health at the table with these. And as districts are expected to put together a plan for recovery post-pandemic and preparing programming and supports over the summer, and then assuming full in school this fall, our Agency of Education is really encouraging all of our districts to make sure that they have a community mental health partner at the table, even if they don't currently have a contract with someone, to reach out and partner, because we still have those broader local interagency teams where they know each other, and to be making sure that that is one part of that lens, child welfare being another. And then I think many districts are starting to think about, if they're not already doing some universal screenings, how will they start that? What will they look to? And then again, just communication between our state level entities about, I've been asked, like, so what tool would you recommend? And I keep saying, I'm not going to pick one tool to recommend. I recommend a process for how the local district and with their community partners thinks through what's the most appropriate tool for our school and district in our community. So thank you, Kelly, and others for continuing to messaging that. And I think we already talked about the federal resources and just wanting to think about that long-term vision, but I totally agree. This is an opportunity we don't want to let pass. We don't want to squander it away. So I think that's it.
Thank you, Laurel. Way to persevere without power.
Thanks.
Well, everyone, I feel like our discussion today has been rich, and we probably have lots more to talk about. And certainly if you have questions for Laurel or Miriam or just in general, we will be here to respond. And I'm realizing that we're past our scheduled time, so we will not close out if you want to stay on. And I want to respect and honor that if you were only planning to be on until 30 minutes past the hour, that works too. We will share the recording. And we didn't get to the last chunk of our content, but we can certainly pick up on that next time as well, which is kind of taking these messages to the, now what, especially as these dollars are coming and folks are thinking about next steps for the spring, summer, and next school year. So anyone have questions?
This is kind of a big question, so nobody feel like you have to answer this, but I noticed the title of your department, Miriam, and it triggered this question. So we're thinking about how are we attending to the increased mental health needs of students with autism or students with other disabilities that maybe are not part of our normal conversation, but experience the same pandemic and maybe having the same kind of reactions, but it may not look the same. And a lot of times special ed teachers don't know how to look for signs. Like in our state, mental health is completely separate from our disability services. And so the center I work with, we have a project that's focused on autism that's trying to bring some of that awareness to some clinicians. But I just wondered, since it looked like your department, state department, combines the two, if you've had any success helping think about the mental health needs of students with disabilities.
So at the state level, yes, but I think Casey should probably answer that from a district perspective. I just will say that the advantage is that we do a lot of crossing of this of stuff, in general. So yeah, we have talked about that. We've talked about kind of what does it look like. I think in the department, we've talked about it more in terms of delivery of behavioral health services, not specific to school-based services. So that's why I think, Casey, maybe you can answer. I think there definitely has been some discussion at the local levels around students with special ed needs and generally thinking about that. But anyway, Casey.
Yeah, sure. I'll hop in. From a school-based perspective, we include a lot of people on a students team, especially students with disability. They have a lot of wraparound services, and they have teachers, and if they've been referred, they have a mental health provider, they have parents. And so if you talk about that team, or they have their special education team, their teachers, whoever's involved. But we serve those students, all students, the same. When I say the same options, same services, same opportunities, and that we include everyone in part of that decision making, and to work with those school-based therapists to provide those services to that student. So we don't separate or look at our students with disabilities differently when it comes to delivering those mental health services. We just include more people in the decision making and the service process. So all these people that work with our students on a daily basis make sure that they have a voice, or even provide the referral and say, Chris, we worked with Chris past few years, we've noticed recently X, Y, and Z. Can we meet with Chris? So we have the Kelly Autism Foundation, who we might get, pull an expert from them, but hey, look, things are changing. Can we sit down and talk about this, bring in one of our LCSWs and just sort of have a wraparound service feel. So we do that with each and all of our students. And of course, you know, the team makes it a lot easier, but we do continue to provide those mental health services to all of our students, those with disabilities, those without, and it just may look a little different about who's involved in that process. And I hope that's sort of what you were asking.
It's totally what I was asking, but I'm just super envious of your response. Like, because in our, they were just saying, we have this position called a family crisis therapist that's in our elementary schools, and they don't feel comfortable working with students with autism specifically, but sometimes other disabilities because they're a mental health provider. So when you were like, oh, well, of course we just provide the same mental health services with, you know, people who understand the student, I was just like, wow, that I'm impressed. Thank you.
So speaking of language, this brings up a really interesting thing that we have some heated discussions about. We always use behavioral health as the term in Kentucky because it encompasses the broad range. And so just as our State Department is behavioral health, developmental and intellectual disabilities, those community mental health centers, which are called traditionally community mental health, although they all now have their own names, but they have both mental health, substance abuse, developmental and intellectual disabilities, first steps, early intervention, all of that. So they truly are the continuum, both vertically and horizontally, to serve everybody. So there is opportunities at that level too. So I think it is something that is mimicked at all levels. And I'm glad to know that it is picked up on in the schools as well.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing. It's not uncommon for our mental health providers to be part of the IEP team and have their services also listed on the student's IEP.
Other questions? Regina, I saw you typed in chat. Do you think a district tool is best for the individual schools within the district? And maybe could you say a little bit more about what you're thinking? And I don't know if you can come off mute or maybe type more in chat. And we can certainly reconnect offline as well.
Let's see, just quickly,
Mm-hmm.
I know that districts will adopt a certain tool, whether it's for school mental health or for behavior, academics, PBIS, let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes those tools don't necessarily support the demographics, the specific demographics that are in the school. Does that make sense?
Could you give an example of a tool that you're thinking about?
Not really, not right offhand at the end of this meeting, no. I know I've been on both sides. You know, the person sitting in this school, whether I've been in the classroom or at the administration level, and then we have been given the directive, okay, this is what all the schools in the district is going to do. And so the school ends up finding itself, how do we make this work for our population? Does that make sense? I think what I'm trying to say is the money is coming down,
Mm-hmm.
and the districts and states are trying to figure out how to use money, and then ISF and the behavioral health folks are trying to figure out how they can be at the table with that money. I guess this is a work in progress.
Well, I think the point you're I don't want to put words in your mouth, Regina, but you're speaking to context, right? And what might work in one place might not work in another. Or you need to be sensitive to, you know, the resources matching not only the need, but also the local community values, and being able to make that connection, right?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think I'll just chime in really quickly. I think one of the benefits of using something that's more focused on capacity building and systems development. And that's what we're trying to do in either the district capacity assessment or the new DSFI that allows and gives space to coming together and understanding this MTSS in a large kind of way. And then if we have the right stakeholders around the table to be able to give them space to talk about the nuances and reflecting on the differences across the community that leverage that more equity lens all around. But I think one of the things we're trying to do is say, what are the core features? What are things that we all can rally around in systems change and designing this? And let's start from there and then be able to customize it to fit each of the unique needs of people that we serve and communities that we serve.
I feel like we see
Thank
this
you.
in Delaware. I feel like we see this in Delaware too. You know, our Department of Education can have recommendations and say what they think would be best based on their research and their teams. But our districts have a lot of autonomy to make their own decisions. So then it's that same trickle down level at the district level. They might make some decisions and recommendations for the schools. But again, a lot of the districts try to give their schools that autonomy as much as possible. So I think that it really all comes down to who you have represented on these teams. And when you're selecting people to be on your DCLT, it has to be people of all different voices and all different backgrounds from the different schools in your district to be the voice to stand up and be the advocate for their schools. So especially if you're in a school, in a district where there's schools in different types of environments in your area, in your state, I mean, you want representatives from all of those areas to be mindful of kids that need to be supported across the district. I think including, you know, disabilities, different socioeconomic statuses, like you need people of all different realms on that team to advocate for those kids. So I see that issue as well here, but I think it's really about the makeup of who you have representing, you know, your teams.
Thanks, Heather.
So I'm seeing our time, and I'm so appreciative that everybody's here at the table that can be. So I'm really appreciative of the dialogue, and I don't want to stifle it at all. I have time to continue on for Q&A. We will make the PowerPoint deck available. I want to, for those of you who do have to jump off, I wanted to offer two pieces, resources to take away. Katie has done a tremendous job of creating a Spark video that introduces ISF, I think, in a really easy to listen and lean into way that carries a lot of common messages that we've been all talking about, but how hard it is to deliver, because we're really talking about redesigning the system. So we've got the Spark video that's brand new. It will be posted on the PBIS website later this afternoon, I hope, if they can get the link to work. But we'll make sure you all get the link to that. And then the other resource was offered by the Oregon Department of Ed. So in addition to the Hexagon tool, which is a tool that we could possibly use to think about how we really use the new funding coming our way, that kind of helps that consumer guide aspect where we're asking the right questions. Is this a need? Is this a fit? And how do we design the system and capacity to make sure it sustains? There's another Oregon Department of Ed also has a flow chart for decision making that I really appreciated. So we'll make sure we get that to you, which could also be a way in to challenge our leaders about how they're spending their dollars.
This is just one quick request that reminded me of. If other states have great templates, this is to the funding piece for how they're leveraging the funds to address these kinds of things that they could share. I just think that would be another great thing to connect with. How are we accessing those resources more systemically if anyone has strategies for that?
Great point, Debbie. Well, thank you all so much for hanging in there with us today. And